Hello there. My name is Todd. I am progressive mystic, a progressive mystic. Thought about calling my channel The Progressive Mystic, but I'm only one of many, I presume. I'm not so presumptuous as to say the only or the preeminent progressive mystic. No. Now, the Rational National, David Dole, I mean, if I was a Rational National, I might be a little offended. But maybe he deserves it. I don't know. In any case, I'm not going to use the definite article. I'm just going to be a humble progressive mystic. Progressive politics. I'm a lefty, and I'm a mystic. I'm into mysticism, which is probably not what people think, but set that aside. Purpose of this video. So I did another video. This is my first one announcing that Ben Burgis agreed to debate me. I received a follow-up since then confirming he wants to go through with this later this month. So I'm pretty excited about that. And in my first video, I explained how I would go about debating him. And I have to admit, upon watching it, I really should have used less jargon, or should have explained more of the jargon. It was probably a video I was more intending for Ben to see, to kind of show him how I would argue that I'm a worthy debate opponent, not somebody who doesn't know what they're talking about, or somebody who would, I don't know, utterly fail in a debate, or, in any case, hopefully I accomplished that much. But in this video, I want to make a video explaining one key point of the jargon I use in that video, and that is Platonism. I described in my previous video I would be defending a Platonic Theism in several respects, and one of those respects is the Platonism, in the sense of Platonic theory of forms or universals that I'm going to get into right now. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over this historically, how this idea arrives in Plato, and then I'll turn to the 20th century and this Platonic, the lowercase p, I would say resurgence that took place, and show what motivated Plato's original theory and the later resurgence by 20th century philosophers. First off, let me give us the basic philosophy 101, like what is Platonism. They usually get the example of redness. Philosophers love talking about redness when they do Platonism. I don't know why. But anyway, you might have noticed there are many different things that are red. You might have seen a red car, maybe a red fire truck, red shirt, red house, red sunglasses. I don't know. Lots of red out there. And what all these things have in common is the color red. And so according to a Platonic theory of universals, there is a truly existing red that all these things have in common that we would call a universal. These things all share in the many particulars, red things, and this idea, it's kind of how we talk, right? We say redness and we know what you mean. Oh yeah, it's red. It's a red shirt. It qualifies under the category of redness, and it fits our language. And I guess the question is what to do with it, metaphysically, how seriously should we take it? And might kind of seem at first, this common sense view would be this what's called nominalism, where you just say, it's really just red, we just name things, a bit of red, but we talk that way, it's convenient, but we can't really say that it really exists like a redness, out there in the ether or whatever, right? And that probably, I would say, before Plato came along, Socrates, Plato, might have almost been unspoken common sense. Although I can't really substantiate that, but I suspect it might have been. In any case, you get, unfortunately, when people talk about Plato and his universals, the theory of forms, it's called, they'll talk about redness, or they'll talk about beds or cats, right? Like there's, many beds, but the idea, the form of the bed that the carpenter who makes the bed has reference to, that is the real bed, right? And actually, gonna say Plato himself has Socrates give that example in Book 10 of Plato's Republic. And so he did it to himself. It's not clear to me how serious he is about that idea, especially in the context of Book 10 of the Republic, which I don't think Socrates is being upfront, but that's a different story. However, there's also another example in the dialogue, Cratylus, where he uses that idea of a shuttle, right? So that's the real shuttle, right? So, as opposed to the many shuttles that people use. So, in any case, I should say that those are the only two examples I know of like objects like that Plato uses as an example of forms. Usually, what you see is forms like mathematical objects, oneness, two-ness, geometrical objects, equal, unequal, or at least supplied geometrically, triangles and circles and whatnot. And then ones via evaluative ones we would call today normative or moral, even like justice. There's a big one, beauty and the good, of course, is supreme. And then you get these like structural ones like likeness, unlikeness, greatness, smallness, Plato will refer to. Occasionally he talks about a bed or a shuttle, but he's mainly interested in these either like structural, mathematical, or evaluative. Proclus calls perfected forms like goodness, beauty, and justice, right? So that's first and foremost. I just wanted to clear that up historically, because a lot of people get introduced to the Plato's theory of forms with these examples that aren't the examples that motivate the theory for Plato, as I will explain. So, for those of you who don't know, Plato wrote dialogues back in, we're talking the 400 to 350 BC, right around. He was active, and he was a student of Socrates, the famous Athenian philosopher who was condemned to death for making powerful people look bad with his nasty philosophical questions, supposedly corrupting the young. And Plato wrote a number of dialogues with Socrates as the main character, most of them, not all of them. And a good portion of these dialogues result in a negative result. You don't get a positive conclusion. What you get is Socrates questioning someone about the nature of courage, or the nature of knowledge, the nature of virtue, the nature of justice, and you find out they don't know anything about it, and you get to the end of the dialogue, or in case the end of the book 1 of the Republic, and you don't have a positive definition. You're back to the beginning, right? And a lot of scholars think that was the historical Socrates. That's how he functioned. Those dialogues were more based on the historical Socrates, and that the next set of dialogues I'm going to mention are the ones that have positive content. A lot of scholars think this is Plato's innovation. Not clear to me that's the case. But in any case, these other dialogues, often called the middle dialogues, you get a positive content. Immortality of the soul being one, and the so-called theory of forms, right, which is Plato's like theory of universals, right, the aforementioned redness versus red things distinction. And fortunately, we don't know historically what Plato was thinking, right? Like, he didn't leave a diary, how he came up with it, but he did in the Phaedo dialogue. The Phaedo have his character Socrates, right before he dies, right before he drinks the hemlock, give a sort of autobiographical account of his own philosophical journey, or I should say 2 journeys he describes. And so we're in the Phaedo, Socrates hanging out with some friends right before he drinks a hemlock, talking philosophy, and they get into the subject of the immortality of the soul because they want to convince Socrates he's going to just not exist anymore. Before he drinks a hemlock and dies, and Socrates is like, no, that's depressing, but I'll talk about it anyway. It's not exactly how it went down, but in any case, Socrates proceeds to give a number of arguments for the immortality of the soul, which I'm not going to get into. But after giving a series of arguments, he's convinced everybody there present, apparently, except for one guy, Cebes, who he says, Socrates, I'm not convinced. You convinced me the soul existed before, convinced me it existed many lives, but maybe it's like this is the last one, right? And maybe your soul, much like a weaver, eventually gets done weaving, your soul's done weaving new lives, right? Something like that. And Socrates is like probably a little exasperated, I would think, right? Like, good enough for me. His soul lives like many, many times pre-existed, right? Like I'd feel pretty confident. And Cebes wants the whole shebang. And Socrates could give a simple answer, but he doesn't. Instead, he tells his philosophical life story, which is kind of involves, I guess you would say, the discovery of the Plato's theory of forms. So, first journey, Socrates describes being a young man. He was into investigating nature. We would call it the natural sciences, right? Wanted to know, about the sun and the stars and all the things you see around the planet, right? Animal kingdom, plants and whatnot. I'm sure. Especially seemed interested in like cosmology and astronomy, according to his comments in the Phaedo, and he quickly got dissatisfied with this study. Socrates did because he wanted to see what we call a teleology. Teleology, telos meaning end, Greek word for end, means some sort of like purpose. End towards goal-directed behavior, and in particular, what Socrates wanted to see, he wanted to see the manifestation of goodness in nature. What he said he wanted to see, this is how he explains it. He says, I wanted to see, he wanted to pick up a book written by one of these, scientists or whatever, that explained, okay, yeah, tell me what about the sun and what it's maybe made of, whether it's stone or fire or whatnot, right? And whether it's in the center or whether it's in the center, and then tell me, I want to know why it's best these things are this way, right? Kind of a naive sounding kind of assumption, right? Like childlike. Well, it must be, the sun must be there because it's best, right? No. But as we'll see, there might be reasons, for holding that assumption. In any case, Socrates gets tired of this science study at one point. He comes up with a new method. He says he turns to the study of words, concepts, language, logoi, it's called, logos, and the singular in Greek. And what he does, he comes up with a kind of methodological, metaphysical, epistemological principle where he says that the things that he discusses, right, like greatness, smallness, oneness, manyness, justice, beauty, right, these things, they exist themselves, by themselves, right, like apart, separate, like we talked about earlier with the redness example, and the many particular things get a share, they participate somehow in these ideas. He calls them forms. They're often called eidos in the Greek, or idea. So they use the word ousias, essences, right? These forms seem to be like bearers of essences, right? Which is he says essence would be that which each thing is, right? Like what each thing happens to be, right? The specific characteristic, right? That our language, our words, I guess, we have reference to, or at least many of them do. That's his assumption. Now, why did he assume this? Right? What motivated this? Because it seems kind of weird. I think it seems weird with the redness thing, But Socrates, he spent his career, like I said, questioning people about these ideas, right? These concepts that we use that really have meaning, and often it's moral concepts he's really interested in, like, virtue, justice, courage, wisdom, and temperance. And the presumption, if you're going to be investigating and looking for definitions of these words and seeking them out from all your fellow citizens, is that there is some sort of like real thing we're looking for, that he really exists, right? That we're not going to be painstakingly looking for a definition of virtue or justice, right? If it would be fruitless, like if you didn't at least have this methodological conviction that there really was, like this form, this idea of justice that you could look to as like a paradigm, a pattern, right? That with reference to all just things, right, are just because they somehow participate in it, so to speak, right? Much like red and redness, right? So that's one factor that motivates Socrates' theory of forms, at least Plato's character Socrates, who knows about the historical Socrates. Aristotle says that he agreed with him, just kind of convenient about the forms being eminent, but I don't know. In any case, the second one is often maybe overlooked, underestimated, underappreciated, is this kind of quasi-mystical aspect to the forms, right? And this really comes forth in a few dialogues, and the Phaedo, but as well. But really, we'll talk about it, how it in the Symposium and the Phaedrus, the two places I want to touch on real quick. Symposium's a dinner party. Socrates crashes with this playwright who just won a big award at a festival the day before, and Socrates didn't attend, and he shows up at the party uninvited afterwards, the day afterwards. And these guys get drunk and eat, and they pass around a bowl of wine later on, where it can't touch the table or something, right? Drinking party. But what they do after eating is they take turns giving speeches on love, right? This bunch of intellectuals, playwright, doctor, comic poet, take turns, and Socrates gets to go last. And Socrates' speech, of course, knocks it out of the park. He's got like the best one. And the culmination of that speech is he describes, he has this kind of love guru, you might say, Diotima, this priestess, who taught him in all the manners of love, according to Socrates' account in this speech. And her final teaching is this like higher mystery, so to speak, the step-by-step process that culminates in this supreme vision of beauty itself, right? And so according to this like teaching, the proper object of love is beautiful, right? And so these higher mysteries, you start off appreciating, beautiful bodies, loving a plethora of beautiful bodies, like a little proper pervert. But you're looking for the commonality, right? And start to see beauty in just one body and get crazy, just kind of, make it more a little detached. And then you move on to the beauty in souls, right? Make beautiful conversations, learn to appreciate the beauty on that level, even if the body of the person you're conversing with as a beautiful soul is a little bloom, right? So get a little deeper there, and then he talks about appreciating the beauty, like customs, habits, practices, it would be, good study habits, going to the gym all the time. But then he gets to the higher studies, and this is where he's turned to these intellectual pursuits, mathematics, geometry, astronomy, harmonics, music, and you study these things with an eye for the beautiful. You want to turn to the great ocean of beauty in these studies and see all the beauty that's common to them all. And after some period of these studies, you will, if you're fortunate enough, good. Diotima doesn't seem to think Socrates can do it. She's telling him the whole time, I don't think you can do this, but I'll tell you anyway. You get this sudden vision of beauty itself. That's the culmination of the erotic education that Diotima gives Socrates. And this vision of beauty itself is said to be described as like ultimate reality, really that which is really real. and the perfection of beauty, right? And also described to be a place where an experience within the soul gives birth to real virtue or real excellence, arate, excellence, but in like kind of this moral sense, you know. But, in any case, this kind of experience, right? There are correlates, I believe, of it throughout, history, different mystical traditions. Sometimes it just happens. And to give you an idea what I'm talking about here, I have a passage from Zen and the Brain. This guy, James Austin, neuroscientist, got really into Zen Buddhism, the Rinzai school, where the goal is to have sudden kensho or enlightenment, right? And in 1982, this fella had an experience. He's sitting on a train station, years of meditating, practicing Zen, sitting on a train station where he says, instantly, the entire view acquires three qualities: absolute reality, intrinsic brightness, ultimate perfection. With no transition, it is all complete. Every detail of the sign in front of me is registered, integrated, and found wholly satisfying all of itself. And then it's kind of, he says this lasts like 3 to 5 seconds, and then he has another wave of insights. This is the eternal state of affairs. Nothing whatsoever to fear. And then like another wave of insight where he kind of talking about the internality of this experience. And then over like the next, like over the weekend, next couple of days, he has another series of insights that are interesting. I think they parallel what we see in the symposium. He says an objective reality exists, infinite in scope and profoundly intimate. He doesn't say intimate in the symposium, but infinite. And then such reality is the basis for all right thinking and right actions. If one were to act always within this perspective, one could do no wrong. Right? This is what, this is the soul gives birth to real virtue and right moral excellence, right? And in Plato's account, in Diotima's account, I should say. So you get, this fresh vision of larger reality. Ultimate reality does exist. It is eternal, right? Which is the same language Plato uses to talk about it, or Diotima uses to talk about it. And so what you have here is a quasi-mystical enlightenment experience that Plato uses to fill in the theory of forms with some really kind of interesting content, right? So these abstract objects, if you will, right? They are typically taken to be just that, like you kind of like subtracting, right? It's not the form of the cat or the abstract object, universal cat, right? Isn't a real cat. Not so with beauty itself here. Here we got an example of what they call self-predication, right? The form of the beautiful, right? It's not just the abstract, whatever idea, principle. It's also itself beautiful. And the analogy I like to think of is, let's say you were in a valley and you had like some rivers and lakes, and then you were to climb up to a mountaintop, and on you get to the top and you see there's a giant, huge reservoir of lake, and you infer that all the water below comes from this lake, and this is the source. And I think that's kind of the inference, right? That in conjunction with this maybe budding idea that you needed to have real forms, really eternal existing, like abstract forms, right? To make these inquiries into justice and whatnot meaningful. This mystical vision, quasi-mystical vision, right, is, I think, it's presented here as epistemically profound. Like this is knowledge, right? And however, she does say, Diotima, that even after this experience, one needs to nurture it in order to become a friend of the gods. There's still work to do, which might have something to do with the dialectic in the Republic. Maybe I'll get to that later, probably not. But in any case, further thing I do want to mention here is, I should say, Phaedrus, there's this mystical thing as well. There's this like soul flight to the back of the heavens Socrates describes in this myth, this beautiful myth he tells in the middle of the dialogue, and at the top of this journey, top of the heavens, the whole soul beholds really real reality. And in that vision, Socrates says that beauty shines brighter than all the other forms. All right, so you behold the form of beauty in this vision, but you'll behold other forms too, like temperance, justice, wisdom. All right, which he says they don't shine quite as bright, and that's why we don't remember them as well. He says we have a sharper memory of beauty, and we recognize it in the visible world, especially in like bodies of people we're attracted to sexually, which is a whole nother thing he does in the Phaedrus. Is just rather interesting and fun. Don't have time for it, but in any case, this Phaedrus and elsewhere, the idea that there's this unified, I guess, survey, right, that takes place when you have this like vision of ultimate reality, beauty being very prominent, most prominent, but you distinguish the other forms too. They all make sense from there. And I think in the Austin quote, where he talks about intrinsic rightness and perfection and this evaluative moral aspects to the experience, I think that carries a lot of weight in Plato's scheme too, and motivates this theory of forms, if you will. Theory. It's not theory, it's maybe overstating the case. But in any case, so I guess that's about it. I should add in the Phaedrus, Socrates says at one point that human beings, their ability to do speech and talk, with universals and in this way where you can really, gather a unity, a plurality of sense perceptions into a unity, that this ability is rooted in that vision that souls, non-human souls that hadn't seen that before can't. Souls that hadn't had that vision, before can't pass into human form, which is an interesting theory, dovetails nicely with what Terence McKenna's theory, that magic mushroom eating, like Homo erectus, right, early Homo sapiens, that they had these like spiritual, visions, right, and that helped them develop language and whatnot in some way. In any case, I heard that somebody said they saw that on Joe Rogan. I looked into it, and it's probably true. It's probably true. I believe it. In any case, it's not really that important for this discussion, but kind of fun. What else we got here? So I'm just going to say, mention really briefly, Platonism, after Plato went away, died. It kind of faded in a couple of generations. He had some successors, his nephew, and a fellow after that more or less carried on his thought. And then we kind of get into this area of like skepticism and then like Stoicism, where they go away from theory of forms. Then it comes back, and largely in that Jewish thought, Hellenized Jewish thought, after Alexander the Great, conquers Judea. Greek thought starts infusing Judaism, and they like Plato. Right? And the Philo of Alexandria is a great example of this. He is a philosophically trained Jew in Alexandria, the great philosophical city, and he allegorized, probably inherited a tradition where he took the Torah and made these stories, allegorized them in terms of like Greek and Platonic and Stoic philosophy. Sometimes in ingenious ways, sometimes it's kind of roll your eyes. Sometimes it's like, I might not buy that. I don't know, but maybe one day we'll look at that on this channel. I would love to. Also, I should mention late antiquity, Neoplatonism, Plotinus, big figure there, Proclus, guy I really like, and they really developed this systematic approach that really emphasizes this mystical aspect of Plato, right? And they're into the math and all that stuff too, but and they don't go for forms of beds and stuff, but they restrict their forms to maybe a smaller set. They don't have a ton of them, but they allow in quite a few. They'll call them like rational principles of nature and the soul. So a lot of abstract objects for them. Although, as we've seen, it's the beauty itself, self-predicated, and you say that about the other forms. They're a little more than just abstract objects. They are, I guess you would say, paradigms is the word, paradigmatic patterns, perhaps. In any case, they will be held. Beauty itself will knock you on your ass, according to Socrates, Plato, and the Republic. Let's turning now to contemporary times. Plato's Platonic thought didn't play a huge role, really, in the Middle Ages or even the Renaissance too much. A little more in the Renaissance, and really didn't see this kind of full-throated theory of forms-esque thing come back until 20th century. And a big figure here is Frege. Was it Gottlieb Frege, a German fellow, very bright mathematician, logician, and a philosopher, philosophy of language, big figure. And Frege is looking at mathematical statements, these really sophisticated mathematics too that was really taking off in that time. And he's saying, like, well, these things, I can't make sense of these things. They're true, right? Like, I'm not going to, like, say the Pythagorean theorem or whatever isn't true, even though it's not true under Riemannian geometry. But in any case, right, he doesn't want to say these things aren't true. He wants to say they're true. They seem true, indispensable, for science and whatnot. But can't see them in, like, the concrete particulars, right? It doesn't make sense, that they exist there. Aristotle, notwithstanding, and doesn't see how they're conceptual, because if they exist in this psychological sense, then 2 plus 2 would no longer equal 4 if everybody died, right? But it seems to be beyond that. You need this third type, he needs to call them, right, where they are eternal, non-spatial, right, objects that he calls them a third type. Eventually they get called abstract. I read somewhere Quine was responsible for that. Not sure. No, Quine was responsible for, say, abstract object. But Frege liked the term object too, I believe, or talked to him about them as such. And he develops this argument. He moves on from mathematics and goes on to include more abstract objects, including propositions. Right? He's looking at just statements that appear to be true about things that are neither concrete, psychological. Right? So they seem to be, an example, simple one might be that I don't know. John believes snow is white. I think this is in the Stanford Encyclopedia entry. And that clause, snow is white, right? True, seems to be true, right? It's kind of a statement that be, you could say snow is black, it'd be false, right? Snow is blue, it'd be false. And it's not, certain particular snows, right, are concrete particulars, but not snow itself, right? It's not just purely conceptual, because then snow would no longer be white. If no people existed, that doesn't seem right. So abstract objects are getting in, a whole bunch of them with Frege. This is like early 20th century. A couple decades later, you get Quine, the Harvard philosopher, very influential philosopher. And Quine, in 1948, converts to mathematical Platonism. He was a reluctant Platonist. Quine was the most pro-naturalist guy you could be, right? He was, say pro-science, natural science, especially physics, right? He really thought this is the way we're getting at truth through these physical sciences, right? And he wanted to just basically be the philosopher who throws in with science epistemically. This is how we know things. And then Quine notices, shoot, mathematics is essential for physics and science, right? Not just 2 plus 2 equals 4, it's these sophisticated, mathematical theorems and equations that they can't live without, right? That's how they're doing it. So Quine's key virtue says, if I'm going to be that committed to science as our avenue of knowledge, and these tools of science are indispensable to it, mathematics, then I'm going to be a reluctant Platonist, right? So this kind of wakes up people more and more academic, analytic philosophers are like, all right, Platonism, give it a second look. And then they start looking at Frege's arguments for these other abstract arguments. And you get all kinds of Platonic abstract objects, Platonic lowercase, that philosophers have argued for, accepted, debated over, like possible worlds, sentence structures, of course, properties and universals, even fictions, and in any case, this is what motivates this kind of thinking, right? This is what happened. So it's kind of an overlap here because, in Plato's thought, in the dialogue of Parmenides, it's an interesting dialogue where the old man Parmenides, he gives Socrates a kind of quiz on his budding theory of forms. Points out these problems with it. Socrates can't answer. He's stumped. And meanwhile, that's actually, Parmenides raises most of the main objections to abstract objects in Platonism. They're prominent today, including what he calls the main one, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, I believe, calls the main one, the epistemic problem. But I digress. The Parmenides, though, after he shoots down all these, like, Socrates' solutions and raises all these problems, he says these things are important. You have to have them, or it would utterly destroy the power of discourse, right? And Frege and Quine are making similar comments. Quine more just about science. Frege, though, more generally, he's concerned with science, but generally with just thought and discourse, discussion, right? So there's similar motivation, right? You can see how you get to this point. And then throw in further philosophers in the philosophy of ethics in the 20th century came to realize that you really can't so easily derive moral facts from facts of nature, right? And this is relates to Hume's is-ought distinction. You cannot derive an ought from an is, he says. And this fact value distinction became pretty prevalent, and so people who want to be more realist, right? There's still plenty of them. Most of the majority, I think, academic philosophers are more realist of one sort or another, and you can see why. We don't want to say like that, I don't know, just taking innocent babies and throwing them in a trash can is just like wrong in your opinion, or that's your feelings. It feels objectively bad, right? That's kind of intuition anyway behind moral realism. We should, at least consider, take serious. The moral realism combined with non-naturalism, right, equals Platonic realism, I guess, about values, ultimately, right, goodness, right, and justice, right. If we take these things seriously, then and can't find a way to do them naturally, like Sam Harris tries to do. Be honest, a lot of academic philosophers want to do it. It's a popular view. You can somehow make a naturalist account of moral realism one way or the other. But many don't think we can, and that brings in this Platonic realism. Even though a lot of them don't call themselves Platonists, that's the position they seem to be defending, non-naturalist moral realism. So, in any case, that's where we're at. You don't have the quasi-mystical aspect being influential from Plato and beauty itself, vision of ultimate reality. That's not in the analytic philosopher scene. However, I think it's useful, as I will explain shortly in my own account. So, it's interesting. Atheists and theists alike tend to be uncomfortable with this Platonism, right? Either small p, large p. You can see why atheists, naturalists, right, if they're uncomfortable letting in all these like eternal existing realities, right, like that might seem inconsistent with like a physical world. Although plenty still hold the causal closure of the physical, and because the conception of these abstract objects are as causally inert, since they're timeless and spaceless, they can try to work it in. However, most of them tend to be like reluctant Platonists, like Quine, right? It's an uncomfortable position. Theists, particularly I think of William Lane Craig, the theist debate champion, is really well known as a strong theist debate opponent. And he makes his job a lot harder on himself, in my opinion. He outright rejects Platonism, and he does so for theological reasons. I mean, he gives philosophical arguments, and you can pick apart any of these arguments, any of these positions. They all have flaws. The question is cost analysis. What do you want to let go? What's most problematic views, most worth taking the bite on, so to speak. So anyways, and Craig admits the reason he doesn't like Platonism is because it challenges theology, and he gives two reasons. One, he says that this like infinite realm of objects or whatever belittles God's creation of the universe, right? Like this infinities of mathematical objects, abstract objects, whatever. It somehow dwarfs God's creation of, what was this, like 2 trillion galaxies, maybe I read somewhere, at least 100 billion. Pretty massive, impressive creation, life developing on Earth, and moral agents and whatever, people that do science and philosophy. It's not that good anymore because God didn't create math. I don't know. I think it's silly. And then this gets, his other real creation is criticism, concern with Platonism. William Lane Craig is to define aseity. He wants God to have no eternal company, right? He doesn't want God to be one among many eternal realities. He wants to be the only one. And so theologically, it makes Craig squeamish. I see there's other theists that aren't as squeamish about it. I believe Alan Plantinga was okay with it. I'm not positive about that. I've seen some guys on YouTube that'll try to do, argue for the existence of certain Platonic realities like math and logic, and say that means there must be like an eternal mind that comprehends them because they can't exist without a mind. Which that argument runs into the same problem that conceptualism runs into. I didn't think it was very convincing. Which I didn't, I did explain conceptualism. In any case, so Platonism kind of gets often left out of the debate because Christians and atheists alike aren't willing to embrace it, and when they do, they tend to dabble in this like Quine's reluctant minimalist Platonism. And then you'll see people adopting just ideas that seem maybe like counterintuitive with like a strictly naturalist causal closure to the physical worldview, like agency and like free will. For example, like Daniel Dennett defends free will, even though he's a very strict materialist naturalist. And I don't know how convincing those views are. I think it's a lot easier to do it with a robust Platonic worldview, which would include a mind-body duality of sorts, which I will argue there is evidence for, actually. But in any case, so, all right, why did I go through all this? All right, why Platonic theism? Well, I guess I'm going to begin with what I'm going to call like supplemental arguments for Platonic realism, because my main argument is going to be a teleological argument, which I'll get to if we get to this debate with Ben. But these supplemental arguments are really important. One, moral argument. Right? I don't fall prey to the Euthyphro objection like William Lane Craig does. Euthyphro objection, very, very, very famous objection from Socrates' conversation with Euthyphro in the dialogue with Euthyphro, where Socrates, Euthyphro says he thinks he knows what the gods, will, and Socrates raises the objection, do the gods command what is, are the gods' commands good because they command them, or do the gods command what is good, right? Something like that, and it's a dilemma, because if you're doing this divine aseity thing, right? Like you can't, you're going to be uncomfortable if you're Craig saying, oh yeah, no, God does, his commands are good. He does them because they're good. That's what motivates him, their goodness, right? Because that would already give him company, right? But if you don't do that and you just say, no, they're just good because God commands them, then God's commands seem like arbitrary, right? Like ad hoc. There's no like rational justification or force inherent to him making those commands, right? And so, because of this objection, theists just really, really lose their moral argument for the existence of God. You can avoid it, I think, by just settling for a Platonic argument and say, look, I'm just arguing you guys are wrong. These things, God, he does what's good because goodness is real. I'm a value, normative realist, and you should be too. And you just look where your naturalism led you. Now you just think it's like you just have feelings about babies and trash cans. You can't talk about moral truth, right? Shame them that way publicly. But that might be a good publicity stunt, but I think it's also a strong argument. There's good reasons to have moral realism perspective, worldview. So, number one, moral arguments against naturalism. Number two, some quasi-mysticism, right? Mysticism, I think, Platonic, the capital P, right, forms with this self-predicated beauty itself, this idea that there is something epistemic to be said, highly epistemic to such experiences, where people tend to say, wow, ultimate reality, it's real, it's eternal, and this is, produce good behavior. To varying degrees, you see this manifest in all kinds of, religious, mystical, spiritual experiences. And religious experiences are messy because people have weird beliefs associated with them. But I will say and point out near-death experiences is people that see like the divine light and the bliss, and they have experience maybe comparable to what Socrates describes in the Phaedrus myth, right? They are, that often they change their life for the better in certain morally improved ways. It tends to be a real pattern. Also for people who have hellish NDEs, for what it's worth. So, but in any case, I think to some degree, right, this capital P Platonism, I think you can use that. You can say, mysticism has epistemic purchase, and there's a way of using Plato to do that. John Hake wants to use Kant, and the idea is to kind of separate the wheat from the chaff, right? Like get rid of this, like maybe facets of mystical religious experiences that are culturally conditioned, that are specific to like religious imagery and whatnot, and focus on the more abstract general features like light, bliss, oneness, right, love, and universal. If they so be throughout cross culturally. And in that way, I think you can make an argument for some sort of epistemic purchase to strengthen your argument for a mystical, transcendent reality that is consistent with theism, although I got work to do, admittedly. Third, coherent, unified worldview, right? If you're going to be a Platonic realist about values, about mathematics, right, and other important abstract objects, if you will, you have you're able to, I would say, satisfy more core intuitions, right? Like I say, philosophy is this game of competing intuitions, right? Almost any view is going to run into some problem, but I think if instead of doing this like piecemeal naturalist work where you just pick the minimal amount of Platonism you need to make sense of science, and maybe like throw in some free will, even though it's not clear how you can make that compatible with the deterministic world. Say just you bring it all in and you challenge naturalism with the coherence of your worldview. So those are my supplemental arguments. And create better moral argument, bring mysticism as having some sort of epistemic weight in the argument, and then this coherent, unified worldview. Craig's a metaphysical mess, man. He's just like God. God did it. God did it, right? In any case, I don't like saying that God did it stuff, but that's kind of what he does. So, moving on. Main argument is going for Platonic realism is going to be teleological argument based on the existence of life on Earth. 3 stages. Look at whether or not in the theory of evolution, which I don't deny, evolution is fully real. Darwin was like largely, maybe mostly right, but there's problems. And random mutation, natural selection alone looks less and less likely to account for the whole picture. At least it's more controversial, and that, of course, wouldn't rule out some sort of other physical necessities or, other explanations. But there seems to be, at least, from what I see, the attitude is, we can explain it, right? We don't need to bring in anything extra. But I think there is a basis, as Nagel argues, Thomas Nagel, for a teleological explanation that might help along, or a theistic one, which David Ray Griffin has an idea of how like God could subtly communicate with these developing creatures, encourage them to whatever mutate. But I think you could do it with just like maybe a panpsychism, right? Pan, like everywhere, psychisms all spread throughout the universe. Everything has some like proto-mental feature, or at least it arises fairly early in kind of the molecule accumulating process. And then with this like psychism, there's some sort of like proto-mental recognition of the value of associated with maybe like the Platonic form of life, which would be associated with related ideas like beauty, creativity, in addition to like motion and rest and the normal ones. And that I think you can maybe, explain it that way, right? Without having to get into design. I think you can make a similar case for abiogenesis, the horizon of life out of non-life, which again, the evolutionary biologists are even further away from adequately explaining. That's even more challenging than explaining evolution, filling in the gaps with just random mutations and natural selections, as opposed to these like saltational great giant leaps, right? And in any case, that's all in well. The third level is the fine tuning of the cosmos, right? And this is at the level of cosmic cosmology and theoretical physics, and this is where you find like the cosmological constant, like the rate that the universe is expanding, had to be this very, very precise value, or the universe would have expanded too fast or too slowly, and we wouldn't have like stars and galaxies form, so you could have planets and revolve, and there'd be even a chance for life to develop, right? And this they find this kind of phenomenon, a number of constants, and some physicists will argue that when we see stuff like that, it tells us these numbers sticking out that it feels contrived, right? Like, oh man, that number has to be so precise for me to something wrong with our theory. But there's going to be a bunch of them, and they've convinced a whole bunch of physicists, cosmologists, theoretical physicists, that there's an issue here. And as a layman, I'm obliged to take their word for it, and I think Ben probably does too. And then that becomes the issue of how you can turn this into an argument for the existence of God. And the idea is that these precise values are suggestive of some sort of intelligent intervention. And I'm going to argue that it's convincing. and it actually is going to, not only is it convincing against naturalism, I'm going to say it's convincing, along with one other factor I will get to, against Platonic atheism, right? That this fine tuning looks more like I can explain these like evolutionary leaps or even abiogenesis in terms of the abstract objects, Platonic values, whatever, like really existing and some sort of proto-mental, um, you know, chemicals, whatever molecules reacting to it, and that, you know, spontaneously, facilitating this like self-replication, self-organizing things that are necessary for life to take off. And I can make sense of that, but fine tuning, that seems tougher. That seems intelligent, intent, right? This image of the hen and the dial. No, that's not like really fair, but in any case, that's where I start to. I think the tide starts to turn towards theism, the fine tuning argument, and then my second argument is kind of a different one. It's based on the evidence for survival of death. This is parapsychology. I mentioned in my previous video that I think is really important for the argument. The existence of God, it helps not only fend off the problem of evil, if we don't die, if there's continued existence after death, that could potentially mitigate, our miserable little lives we have now, right? But equally significant in my view is in terms of like philosophy of mind. I think there's a convincing argument. I saw John Searle make an exchange with David Chalmers back in the 90s, and it's not that original, really. I'm sure others have said it, and it's an empirical argument. Hey, look, the only thing with minds, intelligence, consciousness that I see, that I'm confident have them, they have biological structure, they have brains, right? So, when we talk about disembodied minds, souls, right? God, show me, right? I haven't seen it, right? And no evidence for it. And so I think you can, that argument works for, philosophy of mind, for some sort of, anti-dualist, right? Not anti-substance dualist position. And it works. This is a guy, man. We're talking about some sort of mind that doesn't have biology. Minds have biology, they have brains, right? So, that's a good argument. However, the parapsychology argument evidence suggests that it's not true that intelligent minds do and can exist without the biology to support them after death, and before as well, before we're born, evidence for reincarnation. This is, for me, that in fine-tuning these two features, put a theistic Platonism over the top over atheistic Platonism. And I say, what am I at? Maybe 70, 75%, right? Probably a higher for like a more robust Platonism, like plus 90%. But naturalism might be true. I don't know, man. I just I'm epistemically humble, I'm not like, super convinced. I'm not going to get super mad. People disagree with me about it because, this reality's hard, right? Philosophy's hard. But in any case, that's overview of my argument in conjunction with a brief history of Platonism. What can I mention here? Once again, I mentioned in my previous video, another big feature of my argument is how I can respond to the problem of evil in a way that Wayne Craig and most Christian theists cannot, because they subscribe to creation ex nihilo, creation out of nothing, which gives God so much power that you can kind of call him a douche if you made a world this bad. We can make argument that, a natural world needs to have some suffering and free will for soul building, and we can't just be all, just like a paradise, Garden of Eden kind of thing. but it's pretty bad, pretty messy. The history of the planet, filled with kinds of misery and suffering that's just very messy. Disease, volcanoes, plagues, right? In any case, problem of evil is strong in that regard. However, creation ex nihilo, creation out of nothing, it's not your only option. There is the actual original theology of the Hebrew Bible, Genesis 1:1 in its original Hebrew is not creation ex nihilo. It's the Hebrew reads are translated when God in the beginning when God created the heavens and the earth, so on, instead of in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. You read the footnote to the New Revised Standard Version, Oxford Annotated Bible, that'll explain that this refers to a pre-existing chaotic condition that God brings order to. Babylonians, Assyrians, Egyptians, right? They all have a similar story, as does Plato and the Timaeus. So this isn't some ad hoc move, I don't mind if it was. I think of the endeavor to try to construct a maximally plausible theology is a worthwhile endeavor. So even if I do something that's ad hoc, if it strengthens the theology, why not throw it in there? So, but in any case, this maneuver mitigates against the problem of evil because God has some limits, some necessities he's working against. And so if he's going to create a natural world, well, it's going to be a little messy. He's got to make a choice. Do I do it, allow the messiness, or do you just continue to make dream realms, right? Which kind of what I believe, afterlife probably is something similar to this dreams, virtual reality machine we have. I think God's able maybe, the divine machine, if you will, is able to facilitate that kind of an afterlife experience, but it's not rooted in the same rules of the natural world, and thus maybe not as interesting and valuable for various reasons. In any case, I think the project is worth it. It's a fundamental assumption that, to my worldview, the natural creation of the universe and the natural world that resulted in life on Earth and us. Glad it happened. And that's I guess all I have for this video. Thanks for listening. This is kind of a lot more long-winded than I meant it to be, but in any case, I think hopefully I brought some clarity to some of these issues. I'm going to make another video soon on the fine-tuning argument. I've done quite a bit of research on that in the past week or two. Looked at some of Ben's comments on it, and some of his debate commentary videos, and I got something to say about it. Interesting topic, and since it's kind of the tip of the spear of my argument, figure it's worth going over and having a video record of my thoughts on the matter. So I will be doing that soon, hopefully in a couple days. In any case, thank you for listening. And I'll be talking to you soon. Take care.